Hey loves, welcome to The Quick Tip,
I'm your host, Dejada.
and I'm Kamisha, and we are a part of the team at Sista Afya Community Mental Wellness in Chicago. The Quick Tip is a podcast where we discuss relatable topics in Black women's mental wellness.
We provide thoughtful reflections, quick tips, and leave you with some things to take action on to improve your mental wellness.
Sit back, relax, and enjoy the podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Quick Tip Podcast. This is your host Kamisha. The Jada is out for today, so I will be the one hosting the podcast. So today our topic is navigating workplaces as a woman of color. So most Black women will work and have a job at some time in their lifetime. But with those experiences, navigating the workplace can be different and sometimes challenging. And today we will chat with Emily Williams about how she's navigated workplaces as a Black woman, how she's helping women thrive and find their voice at work. Just to give you some more information about who Emily is, she is a coach and consultant of Emily R. Williams coaches women of color to accelerate positive change at work and in their personal lives. When they do, they help to create a world for everyone. Emily has written policies to end sexual harassment and increase inclusion in workplaces nationally and globally, including at the United Nations. Emily has worked with national governments, institutions of higher education, companies, nonprofits, and advocates in more than 20 countries to advance social justice. Emily provides consulting, speaking, leadership coaching, and training to organizations. In her spare time, you can find Emily dancing to Chicago house music or checking out cute cafes. Emily, welcome to the Quick Tip Podcast.
Thank you, Kamisha. I'm so happy to be here.
And tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and what led you to focus on supporting women of color in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you said, my name's Emily Williams. You read my bio. I'm a coach and consultant. Before I started my consultancy, I worked for more than 10 years in social justice and organizational development. And immediately, the 9 to 5 that I had before I started coaching women of color, I was working around the world with women activists, usually union members. And I was working with them around how to end gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work. So, I was doing trainings around the world, and actually I had been like on a 5-country tour in Africa where I was doing this training that was, working with women to identify instances of violence at work, and also to kind of like map experiences of harassment and understand the impact. And so I had done that in 5 countries. And of course, I was encouraging women to speak up, right? To advocate for themselves, to develop solutions that would work for them, their colleagues in their workplaces, and in their countries. And then I got back to my office in DC and I realized that I was experiencing harassment at work and that I was in a very toxic work environment. And so I said to myself, I can't be out here, just talking the talk, right? I have to also, do what I've been advocating for other women to do. And so I filed a claim of harassment at my job. And as is the case for many women of color who file claims of harassment, it gets dismissed effectively. And so then I filed an external claim of discrimination. And then I represented myself at that negotiating table and negotiated a life-changing settlement for myself. And not only that, the settlement was important, but then also in that process, because it can take a while, right? From the time that you actually file the claim and then when you get to the end result. And in that time, I worked closely with other people of color in my workplace to make changes, right? To like raise awareness about what the people of color were experiencing in that workplace. And it was a pretty large workplace. We have more than 300 employees. We're working in 60 countries around the world. So there were a lot of people there. And the more that I connected with other women of color, other people of color in the organization, we started to really kind of unearth some really troubling experiences that people were having. But rather than just hold on to that, or rather than just quit right away, we said, no, let's organize, right? Let's come
Yes.
together. Let's let's create some visibility around these problematic experiences, and then let's put forward some solutions. And so we were successful in that. And the organization actually did implement a lot of the changes that we were calling for, or at least some of them that we were calling for. And so I wanted to get into coaching because I want women of color to know that they have more than just two options, right? To either suffer through a toxic work environment or just quit, right? Often when we just quit, we maybe we get a reprieve from like the toxicity, but oftentimes we're still dealing with the anxiety, right? We're still dealing with, the financial pressures that come with just quitting a job, right? So, that comes with other things. And when we actually advocate for ourselves, like in the face of these really serious challenges, right? We can actually learn like our power. We can feel it and then we can know it, right? And that's why I coach women of color, right? Because we actually do have the power to create change, right? In our workplaces and in these super toxic experiences, actually. So that's why I coach women of color. And, the other part of my consulting is actually working with companies so that they can build workplace cultures where women of color don't always have to advocate for themselves, just for the basics of a safe working environment, right?
Well, thank you for sharing your story, Emily. It's very powerful in terms of like how there was such a difficult and challenging experience, and you move from that to like empowerment and also to transformation. So, thank you for the work that you've done and for sharing your story and how you're really coaching and helping women of color in the workplace navigate these issues that we shouldn't have to be dealing with at all. Because most people, they just want to go to work and they want to go home and they, they all this other stuff in between is totally, it's just heartbreaking to hear the things that are happening.
It is, and it's unnecessary. And not only do people like mostly want to go to work and then go home, they want to go to work and do a good job. You know what I mean? And they want to contribute to their workplaces. That's why they're there. But so oftentimes women of color, people of color are pushed to the point where it's like, I'm just going to do the minimum and then get out of here, because it's such a difficult environment. And that's one thing that employers need to understand is that if you treat people well, they'll treat you well, right? They'll contribute their best. And so that's a reminder for employers, right? And it can be a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah.
And what are some of the common challenges that, the women that you worked with and even in your personal experience and with your colleagues, that what are just some like common challenges that women are trying to navigate in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, one is visibility and recognition, right? There's a lot of really brilliant women of color who are in my life and who come to me for coaching services, right? And really, it's the kind of thing where, the women of color have the best ideas in the room, right? But they so rarely get recognized for it. A woman of color who's works in marketing here in Chicago, she told me that her company is like currently navigating some challenges and some shifts related to AI, right? Artificial intelligence. She said that 6 months ago in, a staff meeting, she raised her hand and shared an idea, a strategy about how the company could prepare for this shift towards AI and then also probably weather the storm a little bit more effectively than they are currently. And she said no one heard her, right? But then 6 months later, It's a white man who says something very similar to what she said, and it's, the best thing since sliced bread, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's common. So many women of color experience that, right? Where their voices just aren't heard, where they have these great ideas, they're making contributions, they don't get credit for it, right? And that credit could be anything from recognition and acknowledgement in that meeting. Wow, great idea. Let's continue on that line of conversation, right? To, okay, you know what? Your strategy, you're one of the best strategists in this company. Let's promote you, right? So that recognition, it has different levels of impact, but that's one common thing that women of color almost across the board say, right? And then, the other thing is that there is chronic microaggressions, right? And, we're not talking about you know, the things that, where really people actually maybe deserve the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they don't know about a holiday, let's say, right? So they ask in the lunchroom. Okay, fine. The kind of microaggressions that we're talking about are much more than that, right? Things like women supervisors not copying them on emails that have information that the women of color need to actually do their job, right? Or things like not being allowed to access professional development opportunities. Things like that, right? Like those things are chronic, and they're more severe than asking about a holiday that someone doesn't know, right? Or I would even venture to say that those kinds of microaggressions are even more severe than telling someone that they're articulate, right? There's
Mm-hmm. They're
microaggressions.
sabotaging. Yeah.
Exactly, 100%. And so chronic microaggressions are a common experience. Also, things like bullying, harassment, just like the constant like putting people down, taking work assignments away, right? Not giving feedback that women actually need, right? In order to do their job, or, the privileging of others, people who junior people over women of color who are more senior level positions, right? I see all of these kinds of things. Or, actually, I have one woman in my coaching program. She's a regional director, and her supervisor, who was a man, routinely took credit for her work, right? So he took credit for her wins, right? Those kinds of things are a lot of what I see.
And how are you seeing these things impact women's well-being? Specifically, mental wellness, like how are all of these, microaggressions and not being recognized and all those different things, how is it showing up in how they're able to take care of themselves or just like their well-being in general?
Well, number one, it begins to chip away at women's self-esteem, right? And, so often, and I have an ebook about this around microaggressions. And so, I'm sure we can share information at the end about how women can
Mm-hmm.
access this. And I talk about this in the ebook, is that it's a myth, right? I'm sure you grew up with this. I grew up hearing this, that like sticks and stones may break your bones, but words may never hurt you, right? That is a myth, right? Microaggressions can be very harmful. And so one of the ways that we see that harm playing out is that over time, it begins to chip away at women's self-esteem, right? So when it actually comes time for them to like advocate for themselves, right, or own their work, they're in a place of, feeling like they still have to do better because they haven't gotten recognition at their workplace, right? Or maybe it was something they're focused on what they did wrong as opposed to all the things that they do really well, right? So that's one way, right? Just that like the low self-esteem. The other way is that if creates a lot of anxiety, right? If you know you have to go into meetings day in and day out with a supervisor who really doesn't want you to be successful, you're going to be thinking about that before you go into that meeting, as opposed to how can I shine brightly today? Right? You're going to be thinking about, oh man, she's going to say this. Last week she said that. She's going to put this, mediocre junior person, front and center when really it should be me. And those are the kinds of things that creates a lot of mental clutter. It becomes really heavy. And then we're not focused on being our best selves, right? And I would say also a lot of overperforming, right?
That's a good one.
I see a lot of women of color who are doing the most, right? And it's good work, right? It's work that their company actually needs, but it's not work that they're getting compensated for. It's not work that they're getting recognized for. And they're also wearing themselves down, exhausting themselves in overperforming. So those are the main things that I see, right? And I see those things routinely. And listen, it's 100% a logical response, right? When you're in that kind of environment, you're trying to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
If for women who are listening, if you recognize yourselves and respond in those ways, don't get down on yourself about that, right? There are ways that we can reorient to the workplace so that that's not our default response, right? There's no judgment there. And I've been there, right? I know how it goes. But all of that comes at a personal cost to us, right?
Yeah, thank you for just highlighting those things. I know too many women who've experienced the blows to their self-esteem, confidence not feeling recognized or appreciated, doing more work, getting less support and recognition. And those things definitely wear on people, over time. And like with your coaching program, how do you support women who are experiencing those things to move from that place to feeling, you know, agency, empowered, to feel like they have control, over these things, really over their work experience is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one, self-advocacy, right? That's what I teach. And I teach it in two ways. One is actually the personal capacity that we need to advocate for ourselves, right? So that's, the things like recognizing the first signs of toxicity, right? Because they're often there at the beginning. We have to be able to see them, and then we have to be equipped to actually respond to them in ways that create accountability, right? Because that accountability then creates protection for ourselves. So it's about building up that capacity. And that also includes things like, how are we taking care of ourselves? And not in getting manicures and pedicures, having a spa day, but really getting to the core of who we are and allowing that, honoring that, and then also allowing that to lead at work, right? And in the decisions that we make about our work lives, right? And so there's that aspect of the coaching program, which is the self-advocacy. But then the other part of self-advocacy is hard and fast negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
It's the communication tools that allow us to get more of what we want and what we need, right? And people can say what they want, but we're almost always negotiating in the workplace. And if we're not, we should be, right? Because it's a transactional space. We're there under an agreement, right? We're there to exchange labor for compensation, right? And so when we keep that front and center and we negotiate that, we fare much better, right? And so in my coaching programs, I also teach negotiation skills. And that's everything from, how to set up the negotiations to role plays. And then how do you actually approach salary negotiation so that you can make more money, right? So that's the content of my coaching programs. But what I also do in the coaching program, a huge part of it is the community with other women of color who have been there, who are in the same place right now, with you. And number one, there's that affirmation, right? Because it's so easy to think, oh, there's something wrong with me. That's why I'm experiencing this, right? But then when you're sitting there with 10 other women of color who are experiencing very similar things in different workplaces, it's apparent, there's something else that's going on here that's actually not me, right? So that in and of itself is liberating, right? And then you learn from what they're experiencing, their lessons, right? When they have wins, that feels like a win for you too. And then you know that you can do it, right? And then also that like community also encourages you and holds you and supports you, right? Because that's the other thing is that there's so much isolation, right? Especially for women of color when we're in a toxic work environment or just a challenging experience. Because sometimes maybe your workplace isn't so toxic, but you're just trying to get from one level to the next. And that can be isolating, right? Because you're trying to do it on your own. There's not so many people who can speak to that experience. But when you're in my coaching programs, you have that community, and that community holds you, supports you, and encourages you, right? So, while people are in the community or in the coaching programs, we see them make leaps, right? And getting new jobs and increasing their salaries by, upwards of $30,000, $40,000, right? Because they have that support. And so often we're trying to do it alone. And so that's the other part of the coaching program that makes a big difference for women.
And what are some tips that you would give, you know, Black women in terms of finding a workplace that honors who they are as a person, like even outside of what they do, and also, honors their talents as well?
Yeah, it's really hard. So let me say that. And often, and this is why, I do the self advocacy and help women recognize the signs of toxicity and then create accountability around those is at the first sign, as soon as they recognize them. Because when we're going through the interview process, you know, the company's putting their best foot forward, right? And toxicity can come from lots of places within a company, within a workplace. So it may not be your direct supervisor. It may not be anybody on your team. It could be somebody else who's in another department who feels threatened and they start gossiping about you, right? The next thing you know, they're creating problems for you. So I think it's better to build up the skill set to advocate for yourself, right? And create accountability at work. So I'll say that. Now, I've worked in workplaces of varying levels of toxicity. Some that are highly toxic, and then others that are, toxic from time to time, and then some that have not been toxic, right? And I don't know that there was anything at like the interview point that would have told me that, right? But I will say this, I think it's an advantage if you can work somewhere where other people who either work there or who have worked there, and then they can vouch and say, here's how the company handles these things, right? Or maybe a company has actually gone through like a process of accountability, and then someone who works there can say, actually, the supervisor, you know what? They made a really poor decision that a lot of people were negatively impacted. And then those workers spoke up, held that supervisor accountable, and that supervisor actually listened and changed their behavior. Right. So I would say that that's probably the best way. I think first, you have to like build up that skill set of self advocacy, just like you would any other professional skill. And then two, if you can work somewhere where you know others and you trust those other people, right, where those other people have worked and you trust them and they can vouch for the workplace, they can vouch for a particular department or a particular supervisor, then I would say go ahead with that, right? But, short of, I think probably the obvious when people are looking at like Glassdoor reviews and things like that.
Yeah, Glassdoor, Indeed too. Yep.
Yeah,
Hmm.
because there'll be red flags there, but not everybody. Some workplaces are so toxic where people won't even leave reviews, or people leave with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and they can't write on Glassdoor, right? So, Glassdoor may be a place where you can see some red flags, but it also may not, right? So, yeah, I think learn the skills of self advocacy and negotiation. And then if you can, try to target places where people have worked and they can vouch for the workplace and who would be your colleagues. I think that would be the next best way.
Thank you, Emily. Those are all great ways to like kind of be as proactive like as you can in your search for a workplace that would be fitting, for you in terms of like advancement, a place that, honors who you are, your talents, leadership, good leadership, because so many people quit their jobs because of leadership, and so those things are just really important. So I appreciate you for highlighting those. And what are some support resources? You offer a coaching program, which is a huge resource to women, but are there any other support resources that you can think of that could be helpful for women as they're navigating workplace challenges or trying to find a workplace that's going to be the best fit for them?
Yeah, my biggest piece of advice is like, just don't do it alone. Have community, and it may not always be your coworkers in a particular workplace. Can't always trust them, right? It may not be your family, right? Because they just may not understand exactly what you're trying to do. And, I think for a lot of us, our parents still come from the generation where, they got one job and they stayed there until retirement, right? Like, that advice
Hmm.
doesn't apply anymore, right? And, do the things like, join the associations, get out and network, right? In real life, where the pandemic is officially over, right? And so we can do that. We can go back out in person and meet people. And, this is so important and it's so hard for women to do, but invest in yourself, right? We have to do that. That's when women invest in themselves, that's when they make leaps forward, right? Because what got you to wherever you are is not going to get you to that next level, right? And so we have to do things like investing in the coaching programs. We have to do things like investing in the conferences so that we can network, right? I mean, we have to do those things so that we can actually get ahead. And the key to that is really thinking about it as an investment, right? You pay a little money up front, but then your return is much greater, right? So keep that in mind and do that, right? Like if you're inclined to join a coaching program, join it, right? If you're inclined to go to a conference, go. That's probably your intuition telling you something, right? So that's what I would also say. And then, have a community, right? Absolutely. Don't try to do it alone because it's too hard that way, and it's so much more fun when we do it with other good women.
Yes, absolutely. And having that community support throughout the process is very vital because it can be, very isolating. Um, So now we're going to go to our hot topic. So Black women are getting leadership positions across many sectors. So whether that's corporate, nonprofit, businesses. It's not another day where there's another. This is the first Black woman that's been in this position, or we're getting these positions, but I also think like, are these women being supported? Like, is this a genuine, position, right? Like, is this position that this person occupies, like, do these people genuinely want them there? And one of the things that I think it's called the glass cliff, or something like that, where,
Yeah.
there'll be a woman who will get into leadership and then as time goes on, there's all these tactics and things that happen where, they end up leaving, the position. So all that to say, like, what are your thoughts about like Black women being more visible in leadership and what are some of the benefits, but also like what are some of the challenges with occupying leadership, especially in organizations and places that have never had a person of color in leadership?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, number one, I love it. I love to see more Black women in powerful leadership positions and with a lot of visibility, right? So, and so many more deserve to be there, right?
Yes.
Um, so I'll say that. I think the challenge is, this part about the glass cliff is so interesting because I see it happening a lot, right? Where, all right, the company's basically about to fail. So, all right, we're going to put a woman of color here. Here's now when we're going to put a woman of color in here. And more often than not, she turns it around. She does a really great job, right? And for most women who get to that position, they probably, I'm sure they're already pretty savvy negotiators and they're pretty savvy at, advocating for themselves. That's why they're there. And for, other Black women who want to get to those places, it's also then about negotiating the supports that you need, right? Because you're likely not going to walk into a position like that where you automatically have the support you need. You're going to have to like negotiate that and create that a little bit for yourself. The other thing that I think is like a real challenge about being in, like a top executive role or, a highly visible leadership role is that people will project a lot of their stuff onto you,
Mm-hmm.
even like, even, people maybe who you wouldn't expect, like maybe your employees or your team members who maybe are also people of color or also women of color, right? Because what they're doing is they're responding to your power, and probably the ways in which you're owning your power, which, when people are projecting, it may or may not be warranted. Often it's not warranted, right? But that then becomes, one of those issues to navigate. And I think it can be a real disappointment too, because I think a lot of women, at least this is my experience and many of my clients who are in, senior leadership roles, executive roles, they go in with the intentions of building a different kind of culture, a more inclusive culture, a culture where everybody can thrive, right? Where they want everybody to own their strengths and their gifts. But that actually is a two-way street, right? As a leader, you can come in and do the things to create that kind of culture. But then also your team members need to participate in ways that allow that as well, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one is recognizing when other people are projecting onto you, right? Because that's not yours to hold. And I think the other thing is that, when we are in these glass cliff roles, right? It's a challenge because anytime that you are, stepping into a new leadership role, especially like an executive role, you're going to want to do well. You're going to want to succeed and you probably have the capacity to do so. And it, right? But what's required to like make the thing successful is gonna take a lot of work, right? At least in that first
Mm-hmm.
year and a half, 2 years. And so that's really gonna have to be a balance, right? Of, what we were talking about before, not overworking, right? Or being really selective or really choosy about when you overwork and why, right? And then also getting the right people around you, right? Who can like really help build, or revive the thing. Those are the things that I think are challenging when you take on when women and Black women are in leadership roles like that, right? And then again, it's just balancing work and personal, and sometimes it might look like, all right, these 6 months, like it's going to be a sprint for 6 months, but then I'm taking 2 weeks and I'm going to the beach, or whatever it is, right? But we have to do that balancing. And, I would also just say, like, you know, when we're in these kinds of influential roles, in these executive levels, like, also don't be afraid to make the culture shifts, right? On so many levels, people expect it, people want it. And that's a really big difference that you can make when you're in that position. So, yeah.
Thank you, Emily. Those were like such great insights about this great thing that's happening, but also like what you can do if you are in that type of position to just be able to navigate the experience like of being in leadership. And it's not easy, right? There's usually, more obstacles or more challenges than, our white friends, when they're in leadership as well. So it definitely takes like a lot of tenacity and perseverance, but also being empowered in leadership, you do have the power to really shift things.
Yes.
Um, and so that makes a huge difference as well. So we're going to close out with some final takeaways, some final quick tips, based on our conversation today. So Emily, could you share any final quick tips and takeaways for our audience?
Yeah, I would say number one, treat self-advocacy and negotiation the way you would any other professional skill and learn it, right? And we have coaching programs that can help with that. The other quick tip that I would have is, when you do get into these leadership positions, like own it. Like that's what so much of, that's what we've been working for, so many of us, right? To get into these roles and to have that kind of influence, like really own that and really feel good about that, right? It could be easy to, kind of focus on the stress or like the pressure of it. That's part of it, but also like, you're ready for that. You're prepared for that, and so then just remember to enjoy it too.
Thank you, Emily. And my final quick tip is to have a community of support no matter where you're at in the process. Like Emily was sharing, your community support can be at work, it can be people outside of work, friends, family, professional network, etc., to be able to navigate your experiences at work. All of us, for the most part, have will work in a workplace, and so this is something that we'll be negotiating, for the rest of our lives, unless you stumble upon a lot of money, can retire early or something like that. So, having a community of support is just critical throughout your workplace experience. So, thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Quick Tip Podcast. Emily, if you could share how people can get connected to you, we'll also put your information in the show notes.
Yes. And I also just want to share one more tip. Get a good therapist. You might need one.
Yes.
You can help with that. It's important. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active with all of my career content, which is Emily R. Williams /forward ever. And then also I'm at Instagram at Hey Emily Raquel. That's RAQUEL. And then my website is forwardwithemily.com. So definitely reach out. I would love to hear from you.
Great. Well, thank you, Emily, for being a guest. This is our third episode in the Black Women at Work series. Our next episode will focus on creating your own way, so entrepreneurship as a Black woman. So tune into that next episode. Thank you all for listening. Take care of all of you and be well.
Thank you for tuning in to the Quick Tip Podcast with Sista Afya. Stay connected with us by following us on Instagram and Facebook at Sista Afya. Join us for one of our upcoming groups, classes, or workshops, and sign up for therapy if you're an Illinois resident at www.sistaafya.com/services. And if you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We greatly appreciate you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Take care.